There was a time where passenger trains pulled directly into downtown Saskatoon, but in 1966, the city of Saskatoon would follow the footsteps of the city of Ottawa and begin removing all trains from their downtown core. The new station was here, about 9 kilometers outside of downtown Saskatoon, and the Bessborough Hotel, which is actually Saskatoon's Grand Railway Hotel, and the second last railway hotel constructed by Canadian National. But inside the Saskatoon station, it does have a nice tribute to CN's first president, Henry Thornton, who was responsible for building the Bessborough here, although the departures board is pretty empty with only 2 departures a week heading east and westbound directions.
Oh my god, it's so cold outside.
So, with that being said, we reboarded, heading out of Saskatoon, away from the freight yards, crossing the South Saskatchewan River, and heading for the border of the province that I was born in, Manitoba. Now listen, I love being optimistic, but realistically speaking, we're 8 hours late, which means we're probably going to miss my favorite part. Well, not probably, we're going to miss my favorite portion of the trip, and that is the Qu'Appelle Valley, specifically crossing the Uno Trestle, which is the longest trestle on this trip. But when life gives you lemons, you make hollandaise sauce, because this just means that instead, we're going to get treated to a signature prairie sunset. Now this is Melville, home to just shy of 5,000 locals, and named in honor of the Grand Trunk Pacific president himself, Charles Melville Hayes. Hayes would perish aboard the Titanic in 1912, but in my opinion, he was one of, if not the most monumental minds behind Canada's railway expansion west. And I shared so many incredible stories about him in my full video spending 5 days in Prince Rupert, which was his metropolis of the north, if you want to learn more about him after this video. And after that, we'd head out of Melville and into Manitoba for a final destination of Winnipeg's Union Station for later tonight. And we glide into Winnipeg's Union Station, here in downtown, 8 hours behind schedule, on this bitterly cold, frigid winter night. And upon leaving the train, heading down the platform, although I've been in this station probably hundreds of times in my lifetime being born here, Bella was actually taken back by the grandeur of the station rotunda. And back in 1911, when the station opened, the motto was the bigger, the grander, and the more luxurious that you could present your station as, the passenger would probably think that the railway was rich, and if the railway was rich, that had to mean you were doing good in business, which meant that we were in good hands to travel with you. Which, to be honest, makes complete sense why they did things the way that they did. And the year prior to it opening, in August of 1910, the Grand Trunk Pacific announced plans to construct a railway hotel across the street from the station, and that was the Fort Garry Hotel, which coincidentally is actually our fixed address for tonight. And if there was ever a shot that beautifully summed up what it felt like to arrive 8 hours late in Winnipeg at 4 in the morning on a night so cold that Bella thought her legs were going to fall off.
If you stand out there for 5 minutes, you could die and lose your legs like I almost did.
No, you won't. It was this shot here. And I did do a dedicated video on the Fort Garry Hotel previously, so if you want a deeper dive into the history and experience, you can check that out after this one. But we will be here in Winnipeg for the next 3 days before boarding the next eastbound train from Montreal, which seemed perfect. We'd arrived 8 hours late into Winnipeg, but with the next train being on time, it'll get us right back on schedule.
Not!
Our train was a little bit late, scheduled for a midnight arrival, and at around 11:30 p.m., Belle and I would head down to Winnipeg Union Station. Now, that train would stop about 15 minutes outside the station due to a backlog of freight traffic, and that midnight arrival would quickly turn into a 2 a.m. arrival, which soon became 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and by the time the clock struck 5:30 in the morning, the station staff had completely abandoned an estimated arrival time altogether. But this station has actually been the home of the Canadian in Winnipeg since 1979, when Via Rail took over all Canada's passenger service for the Canadian Pacific and Canadian National. But prior to that, from 1955 until 1979, the Canadian actually operated out of the Canadian Pacific station at the corner of Higgins and Main. The Canadian Pacific would complete this station in 1904, and it was essentially a more humble version of Waterfront Station in Vancouver, which I covered in episode 1 of this series. And in 1906, CP would complete their first railway hotel on the prairies adjacent to this station, the Royal Alexandra Hotel. And this hotel and station were the same gateway for thousands of immigrants and travelers arriving in Winnipeg in the early 20th century for a new life on the prairies. And in 1955, when the Canadian debuted her daily departures in east and westbound directions, she would arrive here at the back of the station, heading west out of the Winnipeg yards for the Rockies in Banff, down the spiral tunnels into Field, BC, and arriving on the Pacific in Vancouver 2 days later. But December of 1967 saw CP announce the closure of the hotel and would demolish her 4 years later in 1971. And although the adjacent station would continue to host the Canadian for 8 more years until Via Rail was formed in 1978, in the following year in 1979, Via elected to use exclusively CN stations for all their major railway depots, moving service over to today's Winnipeg Union Station. And although the Canadian Pacific Station hasn't seen a passenger train in almost half a century, it still stands today. And what an experience it must have been to arrive here in the great station in summer or for a new life across the prairies. Compared to today, where the area around it has fallen into complete chaos, further emphasizing the fact that if you build it, they'll come. This was a clip for a full-length show. If you want to watch the full episode of the clip you just saw, click right here, you get the full show, and they go up live every single Sunday. If you want more clips of what you just saw, click right here, you can see the next great hit.